Hey guys, welcome back to Space Tour Live after a really long break. We hope you've enjoyed your spring break. Today we're kicking off season 4 with our Thursday night space talks, and in the house we've got Heidi Thiemann. Welcome to the show, Heidi.
Hi there, thanks so much for having me.
Great, it's a pleasure to have you. Once again, thanks for joining us. If you're joining us on Facebook or YouTube, very warm welcome to you. And what a great day it is to kick off Space Tour Live on the day of a partial solar eclipse in the UK. And it perfectly makes sense because Heidi is an astronomer. She's got a PhD in variable stars, but she is now a space technology project manager. What's that all about, Heidi?
So I'm currently working on basically bringing loads of space training, skills, apprenticeships, courses to Cornwall because we've got so much space growth, especially with the horizontal launch, Goonhilly Earth Station, radio astronomy, loads of exciting things. So we want to get people trained and get people good jobs in the sector.
Awesome. And what are you going to be talking about today on your talk?
So tonight I'm going to be talking about, variable stars. My PhD's in it, so it's kind of my area of expertise. Yeah. But in particular, we've got this great telescope which ran for years and years called SuperWASP, and it took so much great data. So I'll be sharing a bit of that with you tonight, some of the kind of exciting things we found and some of the citizen science we've been doing.
Awesome. Well, just a note to the audience, if you have any questions for Heidi, let us know in the comment section on YouTube and we'll try to get to them at the end of our talk in the live Q&A. I'll let Heidi take away the stage, and she'll be presenting a short presentation. I hope you guys enjoy it.
Fab, thank you. And I will just try sharing my screen, and there we go. It's coming towards the end of the pandemic, so we should all be good for it now. Fab. So my screen is being shared right now. There we go. Fab. Okay, so tonight I'm going to be talking about hunting for strange stars in the night sky. And there are some really kind of crazy stars out there. And I ended up looking at some really interesting ones as part of my PhD, as part of my research at the Open University. So I'm going to be sharing a bit about that story and how we actually got to looking kind of for these strange stars and, and kind of what they mean for astronomy in general. So there we go. Right, I am going to be starting the story with the SuperWASP telescope. And SuperWASP was this pretty amazing telescope. It's this weird looking thing shown here on the right. And SuperWASP was part of 2 installations of telescopes, duplicate telescopes, which were built to kind of search and hunt for exoplanets, or kind of small planets passing in front of their parent star and causing a dip in the light. So by using the SuperWASP telescopes, we could detect these dips in the light and look for hundreds of thousands of stars. Well, I say hundreds of thousands of stars, actually millions were observed, and SuperWASP became one of the most successful ground-based search for transiting exoplanets to date, discovering, I think, just over 200 exoplanets. There's more being discovered all the time as people go through the data. So, as I said, SuperWASP was this kind of duplicate telescope. There were 2 installations of exactly the same telescope built from these weird-looking cameras in both the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. So in the northern hemisphere, there was one on top of the mountain, beautiful. I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. I always get it wrong, but it's in the Canary Islands, and it's this kind of little tiny thing you can see here, hidden behind some rocks in a tiny shed. There was also another site in South Africa in the Sutherland Observatory, just pointed out here. Again, it's a tiny shed compared to all these big telescopes. It didn't look that impressive. But there were these 2 installations, and they worked together in tandem to survey pretty much the entire night sky. So this is just a bit of a zoom in because I absolutely love this telescope. It's just an odd looking telescope. And this is the shed that SuperWASP was built in. So it's this kind of weird looking garden shed which the roof slid off and exposed the telescope in the night sky. So this telescope is weird in a few different ways, not just because it's in a shed and doesn't look very impressive, but the cameras itself were all 8 duplicate cameras on 2 duplicate telescopes observing the night sky night after night, year after year for around 11 years straight. And these cameras aren't particularly impressive. They're nothing special. They were actually bought off eBay. And these cameras are a fairly small field of view. So if you are into astronomy and you kind of know your astronomy apertures, they've got a view of around 8 degrees across, which is it's from something like 16 times the full moon. So you can see that with 8 cameras together and 2 telescopes observing in tandem, you can survey almost the entire night sky in one go. So with that in mind, with these weird telescopes working together, surveying the night sky in one go, actually you can see a huge number of stars. So SuperWASP worked for 11 years observing the sky night after night, year after year, and it built up an amazing picture of the night sky. Now, this isn't quite the picture of the night sky that actually you would see if you're looking at the telescope images itself. This is sort of a density plot of where all the stars are that SuperWASP observed. Now, if we have a look at the blue section, that's kind of where it didn't observe many stars. But as you move towards green and then towards red and then towards white, SuperWASP observed more and more stars. And you'll notice that that band, that kind of creepy smile across the middle of the image, is actually the Milky Way. And this huge patch of the Milky Way that SuperWASP just didn't observe. And that's really because the pixels in the camera images themselves are too large to identify individual small stars. But even with even ignoring that Milky Way section with so many stars in, SuperWASP still observed a huge number of stars, and it actually observed around 31 million unique stars over its 11 years of operation, which, when you think about it, is absolutely fantastic. So SuperWASP, I've kind of been talking about it in the past tense a bit, and that's because it doesn't actually exist as a telescope anymore. We're exploiting the data, we're using it for so many different things, and I'll talk about them in a second. But the telescopes themselves, actually, they're not there. The sheds are there, those robotic U-shaped arms are there, but the cameras themselves have gone because SuperWASP has been replaced by a new telescope. So in the Southern Hemisphere, this is the brand new telescope that SuperWASP kind of is now. Instead of those 8 cameras, which are actually hidden right at the back on the shelf here, SuperWASP has been converted to 2 large 16-inch diameter telescope, kind of binocular telescopes, and these telescopes are searching for binary stars in the night sky. Now, I'll get on to talking about what binary stars are in a second, but I quite like the new name that SuperWASP has been given. So SuperWASP originally stood for Super Wide Angle Search for Planets because it was searching for planets, and it's now called Zami Demura, which means eyes of a lion because it's got these 2 telescope eyes looking up into the night sky, and is also part of the local language and kind of involving the local culture a little bit more. So I just really like some of that history of SuperWASP there. But as I said earlier, SuperWASP was looking at lots of things in the night sky. And it was looking for exoplanets, sure, and that they were quite interesting and quite fun, but that's not my field whatsoever. What I'm really interested in are variable stars, and these are stars which vary or change in brightness. So the name's quite self-explanatory. And as a kind of side product of observing the night sky night after night, year after year, looking for tiny changes in the light to find exoplanets, you actually pick up loads of variations in how the stars in the night sky change in brightness. And these are called variable stars. And what you can see on screen here is a kind of family tree of variable stars. And really, we kind of classify them into 2 different types, either intrinsic variables, where there's some sort of internal change going on within the star itself, some sort of physical change, or extrinsic variables, where there's some sort of external factor influencing how bright the star appears to be. So the stars for extrinsic variables aren't changing in brightness, just something appears to be making them change in brightness. So a really easy way of remembering that is intrinsic internal, extrinsic external. So what you can see is actually there's a huge number of kind of really interesting intrinsic variables, and these are stars where there's loads of physics going on inside. And the whole point of this is that we can use how the brightness of stars changes to identify what that physics is and what's going on inside the star. So let me give you a little bit of an example of what I mean by saying how we can use the brightness changes to identify what's going on inside a star. Actually, no, we'll get to that in a second because I forgot to say, just before I get to how they change, I love some of the history around variable stars. And just as an aside, we have known about them for thousands of years, and we do know that the ancient Egyptians even knew about variable stars. There's actually records of the ancient Egyptians recording unlucky and lucky days based on how the brightness of stars changes in the night sky. So this is kind of, they've monitored how bright stars change, and they think it actually kind of affects their luck. Anyway, that was a complete aside because I just forgot that I love some of that history so much. So back to kind of the science area. When we say stars are changing in brightness and we can understand kind of their physics inside, what does that actually mean? Well, if we take this type of star, a pulsator, for example, a pulsating star is one which expands as the kind of gas inside heats up and forces its way outwards, and there's lots of kind of interesting physics going on inside. But as it's expanding, the force of gravity is trying to pull the star back in towards its center of mass. So there's this cycle which goes on and on and on for much of the star's life, where it expands and collapses and expands and collapses. And the star changes in brightness and in color and in temperature as it does this. So these are the kind of really interesting physical processes going on inside a star. But we can pick that up in how bright that star actually is and how we can detect it through our telescopes. So that increase in brightness, that sudden increase in brightness through our telescopes will appear as a sudden kind of peak in how much kind of brightness we're getting in our data points, and then it will slowly collapse again. So there's kind of a thing called an asymmetric pulse profile as the star gets massively brighter and fainter and brighter and fainter. And so if we see a star which has got these weird sort of peaks in how bright it appears to be over time, then we know it's a pulsating star. And we can call this type of graph a light curve because it's essentially just how bright a star is over time. So we can kind of understand how much it's changing by, how fast it's changing, and maybe some kind of things about how hot it is, how cool it is, what color it is. So we can really pull out some fascinating science from just a few observations of a star. So that's a pulsating star. I'm going to show you another type, which is a binary star. Now, binary stars are a little bit different. They're not actually single stars on their own, and we actually estimate that around 70% of the stars in the night sky are actually in a binary, in a pair. So not all of them look like this, not all of them are joined to one another orbiting. Some are very far detached, so they really only interact gravitationally when they orbit one another, a little bit how like the Earth orbits the Sun. Some stars are quite close, so they're kind of starting to spill into one another, and these are called semi-contact or semi-detached stars. And then you get stars a bit like this, and these are contact binary stars, where two stars are orbiting so close to one another that they're actually sharing star stuff and star matter between them. And there's loads of things like tidal forces and friction happening between the two giant stars. So it's, if you can imagine, if you put two of our suns next to each other, you'd get a whole load of star stuff flowing between them. So if you look at the data for that, if you look at this light curve, if you look at how it changes over time, it's a lot more fluid because you've got this nice rotation going on. The stars are kind of always there, they're always quite bright, and they have this sort of M shape, or as kind of, when I've talked to kids at schools, they said, oh, it's the McDonald's logo. So they're the kind of McDonald's stars, I guess. They're one of my favorite types of stars because there's so much physics going on inside, and we'll get onto some more of them in a minute. Oh, there we go. And actually, another type of variable star, which everyone will be really quite familiar with, is our own sun. So most people think that the sun is unchanging, it just sits there in the night sky. Maybe it throws out a flare every now and again. But our own sun is actually variable in some sense because there are star spots or dark, cool patches on the surface of the sun, which are actually dragged around the surface as it rotates. And as these kind of star spots or these sunspots are dragged around the surface, we see a change in brightness on the star, which is a little bit more triangular or a little bit more sinusoidal. So we can really kind of pull out information about a star, like how fast it rotates, how big the star spots are, just from monitoring that brightness change of the star. So this is some really, really useful data for us. But you can find some even more interesting things if you have some really weird stars. So one paper that came out earlier this year, in around January, was this paper on a sextuple eclipsing sextuple star system. So imagine, instead of two binary stars or two stars in a binary orbiting one another, the scientists found 6 stars orbiting one another, and that's why you end up with some really weird sorts of dips and changes in the light. And it took a lot of work to actually extract what was going on, but what they found was this really, really interesting, mad kind of system of stars which no one had ever seen before. And I think that's great. You can just pull out so much interesting physics from just monitoring how bright a star is. And this is kind of a similar system. I couldn't find an artist's impression for the sextuply eclipsing sextuple star system, but this is a doubly eclipsing quintuple star system, so 5 stars orbiting one another, and this is kind of what it might look like if you've got multiple stars going around one another. So this was some research done by a colleague at the Open University where he found not just 2 stars orbiting one another, not just 3, but actually 5. So I just think that the stuff you can pull out of here is just so cool. But if we go back to some of that SuperWASP data that I was talking about earlier, that SuperWASP telescope, we've got a bit of a problem when we're trying to deal with it. So I said that SuperWASP was made up of 8 cameras, 2 locations. So we've got 16 cameras taking thousands of images every single night over 11 years. So over those 11 years, night after night, year after year, around 2,800 nights were good, and good data could be collected. This corresponds to around 16 million images that were taken with SuperWASP, which is around 31 million stars in all of those images. And each of those 31 million stars has around 20,000 observations, which means that we've got around 580 billion data points. And that is a ridiculous amount of data to have to deal with. So what we're trying to do with this data is stack all of those images together like this, pull out the brightness of each star in every image, and plot that graph of brightness over time. Simple task, right? Should be easy. Yes, it's easy, but it is so time consuming. So actually, to go through all of those 580 billion data points and pull out all the data for every single star, plot a good graph and find how much that star is changing, how regularly it's changing, it took 50 computers, 2 years to run all of this data. So it was not a small task. It's a massive big data challenge dealing with this much data. And that then leads you to the problem. If you've pulled out all of this data, what do you do with it next? Are all the stars varying in the night sky? Do they all have exoplanets? Well, possibly they all have exoplanets, but that's hard to detect with the type of data that I was working on. Are they all variable? That's a question as well. Out of those 31 million stars, are they all variable? Well, the kind of research over that 2 years found that no, they're not all variable. Around 750,000 seem to be varying on some sort of scale that we could detect. But they might be varying on 2 different timescales. They might be pulsating and they might be in a binary, which means that we could have 2 or 3 or 4 ways that these stars are changing and providing 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 different graphs which tell us about a star. So whilst we've reduced that data from 31 million stars to around 700,000 stars, we then increase it to around 1.6 million graphs that we have to go through. And if I said to you, do you want to go through 1.6 million graphs? Most people would say absolutely not. And I completely agree. I went through around 30, 40, 50,000 by hand, and I was dreaming in graphs by the end of it. So it's not a sensible solution to try and deal with this data. So what we decided to do to try and go through all this data was to use something called citizen science. Now, citizen science is a way of essentially involving people from around the world who might not be experts, who might just be interested in astronomy or might be interested in the subject, to get involved in some real science and make some real discoveries. So we set up a project called SuperWASP Variable Stars, and this is a citizen science project hosted on the Xenoverse platform, which is a platform where lots of scientists have projects and you can get involved in any project that you like. And we set up a project, uploaded all those light curves and asked people, what can you find? What can you identify? What can you classify? So just as a quick aside before I talk about what we did there, if you haven't been on Xenoverse before, I would absolutely highly recommend it. It's a fantastic site where you can get involved in all sorts of science, from astronomy to kind of agriculture to kind of looking for penguins on the ice caps and trying to count penguins to help with conservation, or even helping with translating historical documents. There's a huge number of things out there for anyone to get involved in. But we went down the astronomy route, having a lot of astronomy data. So we set up this SuperWASP Variable Stars project and asked people to get through a load of data. And this is the type of thing that we would ask someone to do on the project. Essentially, we've got all of these light curves, all of these graphs, and we need to classify them into different types before we actually start doing much with them. So we ask people to look at a light curve or look at a graph and say, is it a pulsator? Is it a detached binary, so two stars orbiting others very distant? Are they contact binaries where they're orbiting very close? Are the stars rotating like that triangular profile like the sun? Is it something that we've never seen before? Is it an unknown star? Or is it absolute junk and we don't want to get rid of, we just kind of want to get rid of that data and we don't want to use it? So essentially we've got a pattern matching exercise where you take a light curve and you match it to something that you might have seen before. And that's a really quick way of getting through a whole load of data and getting some really great science out of it. And one of the questions that a lot of people ask with citizen science is, how can you be sure that the data or the answers you're getting from people is correct? And it's a really good question. Actually, we don't just take one person's opinion or one person's classification on what this light curve is or what this star is. We combine 7 people's answers together and we take the most popular answer as the true answer. So, for example, if 4 people said that it's an EW or contact binary system and 3 people said it was a rotator, we would have to assume that actually the 4 people are probably more kind of correct overall than the 3 people, because kind of numbers 3 versus 4, and we would take the correct classification as a contact binary. Now, it doesn't always work, but it's a really good way of getting some really great data out of the kind of huge mass of light curves that we have, all these 1.6 million light curves. So over the last couple of years since we've been running that project, we've had a huge amount of engagement. We've had almost 10,000 people get involved in looking at light curves and telling us what they are. We've had around 200,000 stars complete their classifications, which corresponds to around 2.5 million classifications made by people. And this is a huge amount of data that has kind of reduced what we have to kind of sift through to find the really interesting objects. Now, just as an aside before I get on to some of the results from that, if you are interested in citizen science and you want to do it very quickly without having to sit and click on your computer, we did end up creating something called Variable Star Tinder. And obviously it's not the kind of most suitable name in the world, but what anyone can do is you can get your phone, you can swipe left or right on what type of star it is, whether it's real, whether it's junk, whether it's useful data or whether it's not. And that data gets really quickly put into a main workflow to help us classify stars even better. So if you are kind of bored at a bit of a kind of loose end, you can click through a load of data, you can swipe left or right on your stars, and you can choose your favorite ones. So that's one way of kind of getting involved in citizen science projects. And there's a whole load more out there that you can access on your phone. We've also created little feedback programs so people can improve and actually kind of learn how their classifications are doing in real time, which helps you kind of improve your own work as well. But having said that, and having told you about all that, kind of all those 31 million stars reduced down to about 1.6 million graphs and then put onto the citizen science website with almost 10,000 people being involved, there's a huge number of kind of very big numbers I'm throwing at you. Have we actually found anything though? Have we found anything interesting or real or kind of worth shouting about? Well, luckily the answer is yes. And I'm going to tell you about some of the really interesting ones in just a second. But we have one of the things we have found, which I'm not going to talk about now because it's just not time, is that we've discovered hundreds of new stars that have never been identified as variable before. And this is quite exciting because it just expands what we know about the night sky. But I'm going to spend a kind of few minutes now talking about pretty much 1 or 2 stars, which I just found absolutely brilliant from this citizen science project. And these are stars that we found as astronomers, as researchers at the Open University, but also our citizen scientists picked up on these stars and have made some really fascinating discoveries themselves. So let me tell you about TYC 3251903, this binary star that we found. So catchily named. So this is a binary star system. So if you remember from earlier, there was those 2 stars spinning around orbiting one another really close to each other. And you can see the kind of light curve, that M shape, that McDonald's shape above. On the left, what we've got is a light curve of what we think is a contact binary star. It's an M shape. It is really noisy, but that's what happens with some of the SuperWASP data. But it does appear to be that M-shaped contact binary star. So you might be asking, okay, what's weird, what's unique, why are you actually telling me about this? Well, this contact binary star is unusual because it takes so long to complete one orbit. Now, usually contact binary stars orbit one another in around 6 hours to 1 day. They're really quick, they zoom around one another, and they're made up of small stars which kind of similar colours, similar temperatures, similar kind of spectral types, similar ages. But this star here is taking around 42 days to make this one orbit around the other star. And okay, that's pretty Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy anyway. But to find a system where a star is taking 42 days to orbit another when it should be taking less than a day is really weird and really unique. So we had to think, we thought, why is this happening? Why are these stars being so slow to complete one orbit? And we had some conversations about why this might be happening. And then we thought, okay, the reason they're probably being so slow is because they're probably just really big stars, and it just physically takes such a long time for the stars to make one orbit around one another. And that's kind of one of the simplest explanations. And the thing is, we don't normally see any stars that are giant of this colour making that really long, slow orbit. There we go, got there in the end. So it's quite weird to find stars that are doing that. So what we think we've got is this kind of eclipsing contact binary star, but with a period of around 42 days. So this is our first candidate near contact red giant eclipsing binary star, a type of star that's never ever been seen before. Now, it was predicted in the 90s, but no one ever found anything. It seemed to be disproved. So we thought, oh, great, this is exciting. Let's go find some more. So we actually went to look in some more data, in some more catalogues. We scoured the internet and we scoured astronomical catalogues. And what we found was a further 17 stars which appeared to be near contact red giant eclipsing binary stars. And those near contact red giant eclipsing binary stars were also picked up by citizen scientists in our Xenoverse project. So actually, we had about 3 people pick up a further 10 stars, which appeared to be these brand new types of stars that no one had ever seen before. So that was absolutely fantastic. Now, fine, we've got 1 star plus 26 others, which also look similar. We've got 2 types of data sets. We don't have a huge amount more information. So we decided to go and basically be astronomers, take some data from telescopes around the world. So we conducted this 2-year-long follow-up campaign of multicolour photometry. And what I mean here is we stared at these 2 stars with telescopes, and we kind of let the telescopes look at them robotically in different coloured filters for 2 years, and then we came back to the data and analysed it. So make it sound easy, it's actually quite a lot of work. But we got to use some really fantastic telescopes, and one was the LCOGT, so the Las Cumbres Observatory Global Telescope Network, and one was the Pirate Telescope. So both telescopes are used for educational purposes. The Pirate Telescope is owned by the Open University, so if you do actually want to get involved in some astronomy and use a telescope for free, you can go and use the Pirate Telescope. So that is something fantastic that's worth checking out if you ever have a minute. So we took basically more observations of these stars for 2 years, and that told us a bit more about their colours and their temperatures and what these stars were doing in the night sky. We also decided that we needed some extra data. We needed some data on how these stars are moving around one another, how big they are, how heavy they are, and how they interact with one another. And the way we do this is through something called a radial velocity measurement, or kind of, you might know it as Doppler spectroscopy or Doppler shift. So when you hear an ambulance drive past, it goes meow, that sort of noise. That is how kind of the audio waves are changing to your ear as this ambulance moves past you. If you apply that to stars and to space, a similar thing happens, but rather than audio changing, actually the light from the star changes from blue to red and back as the star moves further away from you and moves back towards you. So in this case here on the screen, while we've got a small star orbiting a large star, or in this case it might be an exoplanet, but we've got a small body orbiting a large body, it's moving quite fast around this parent body. So it's moving back and forwards and back and forwards. It's also making the large star, the parent star, wobble very slightly. Now, if we can't see that small star, we can't see that exoplanet, we can't see that moving around very fast, we can detect the large star, we can detect how it wobbles, we can detect how those wavelengths of light shift back to red and blue and back again, and then we can take that shift as it moves and find out how fast the star is moving, how heavy it is, how heavy the other component is that makes it shift back and forwards. And this means we can kind of bring together this radial velocity measurement, this photometry measurement, mash it together and get some models of stars, which is exactly what we did. And it's exactly what I did. So I kind of got a nice trip out to South Africa, spending weeks working at night, taking all of these hundreds of measurements to try and pull out lots of information about the stars. So I won't go on about that trip because I am now very jealous of previous self being able to travel, and I think it will be great once we can all get back to traveling again. But I want to tell you about why some of the results are really interesting, because fine, that star or these binaries, these near contact red giant eclipsing binaries are interesting because they've never been seen before, but they're also interesting for another reason. And that other reason is that we think that they could be progenitors or kind of the kind of precursors to something called a luminous red nova. And if you think about these two stars, these two red stars, very close to one another, they're going to be experiencing a lot of tidal friction. They're going to be experiencing a lot of physical forces. These stars are already quite red. They're giants. They're quite old and quite late on in their life. So they're not going to survive a huge amount of time longer. They're both kind of equal temperatures, equal colors. So they're probably going to die about the same time. And if these stars are experiencing a lot of tidal friction, tidal forces, it's going to start pulling the stars into one another. They will spiral, merge, and form some huge stellar explosion where essentially a load of dust and gas is thrown off. So that's what we think these near contact red giant binaries could do. They could merge, they'll have this inspiraling event, merge, and throw off a load of dust. And that is really interesting in itself because so few events like that have actually been seen. Supernovae are happening every single day. You can't go on astronomy Twitter without hearing about supernovae. But red novae are really rare. And actually, there's only been kind of 16 to 20 confirmed detected red novae ever. And only one or two that have been observed really well. And one that was observed really well is this event here, the V838 MON event, which was observed by Hubble in 2002, completely by chance. And essentially, it was this massive light echo. And most of you will probably have seen this sort of astronomical image because it's so beautiful and it's so stunning. And it gets shown on loads of textbooks or on TV a lot. It's this light echo that expanded outwards. And it really just puzzled astronomers for quite a long time because no one was quite sure why it happened. It wasn't really a supernova. It was too dusty. It was too red. No one was really quite sure. But it really was only thought to be a red nova about 10 years after it happened because someone saw an event that was very similar. So for us, if we were to find that these near contact red giant eclipsing binaries were going to merge and explode and form red novae, that's really exciting because it means that we could have 27 further stars which are going to produce beautiful things like this. Unfortunately though, around half of them were discounted when we did our research because they just didn't quite appear to be what we thought. They were a bit smaller, so they were maybe a little bit more boring. No offense to those stars. And then the other kind of, not a nail in the coffin, but the nail in the coffin for us being able to view these beautiful events was the fact that they're probably not going to merge for around 20,000 years. So it's quite short in this astronomical timescales, but unfortunately all the stars that I'm looking at, or I spend years looking at, aren't going to produce anything beautiful in the next few years. We're going to have to wait around 20,000 years for them to do anything stunning and exciting. So you can kind of hopefully see that from this kind of huge mass of SuperWASP data, this noisy, messy data set that came from two identical telescopes, reducing that from 31 million stars to about 1.6 million stars, getting the public involved in finding some really exciting things, And then zooming in on some of those discoveries, you end up with only a handful of stars which are doing something really exciting. And that's not saying only a handful of stars, but there's so many different handfuls out there doing so many different things that we haven't quite discovered yet. So I happen to be looking at these near contact red giant eclipsing binaries that may be red novae in the future, but there's going to be so many other things that will be out there for people to explore. And that's what I'm quite excited about with citizen science, the fact that people can go out, pull out lots of exciting bits from the data set and make discoveries like near contact red giant eclipsing binaries that will produce red novae, and they'll have that discovery as their own, really. So before I finish off, I'm just going to show you one more example of that red novae, and just show you why these sorts of discoveries are kind of have this history of citizen science and have this history of being weird and exciting. Actually, the first red nova, or the first kind of slightly unconfirmed, but what we think is a red nova, was discovered essentially by citizen scientists in around the 1670s. A monk was just looking at the night sky and saw some stars that appeared to get red and kind of expand, faint, red again, and then disappear forever. So we think that a French monk was maybe one of the first citizen scientists to look at red novae. So I just kind of like that history going through there. So I'm not quite sure why it's gone back. There we go. So I'm going to finish off talking at you at the moment. Happy to take any questions in a minute. But if you do fancy getting involved in any sorts of citizen science projects, absolutely do go to the Xenoverse website. There's so many cool projects out there. There's some amazing ones where you can look at galaxy scale jets, which are these huge jets expanding out of kind of the remnants of black holes and active galactic nuclei. You can hear birdsong and kind of classify birdsong into different categories. You can translate old diaries from some of the first astronomers. Or if you want, you can get involved in some of our citizen science where we're looking for variable stars and we're trying to find out some weird and wonderful strange stars in the night sky, pull out bits of data, go follow them up with telescopes, and then produce some real exciting science from that. So hopefully I've given you a bit of a taste there, and I think that is my entire presentation, so I will stop sharing. And I can already see there's a couple of questions come through, so they look great. And I will stop sharing my screen. Fab.
Great. Thank you so much, Heidi. It's so fascinating to see that you are so fascinated about stars. And I've learned so much. I'm sure everyone tuning in has learned a lot about stars already. Where did the passion for stars come from?
It's really apt that you asked, because it's pretty much from watching the eclipse. So I remember watching the 99 eclipse. Actually came down to Cornwall when I was a kid, and it was one of the places where you could see the eclipse really well. And I remember there was a guy sat next to my family wearing a motorcycle helmet saying, "Oh, it won't matter, I can just look at the sun." We're all there with our eclipse glasses going, "You really shouldn't be doing that, that's a bit dangerous for your eyes." But I remember that was one of the kind of first times I really fell in love with astronomy and space. And then there were loads of things after that which kind of got me hooked. But I remember that's kind of one of the key moments where I thought space is great.
Wow. Space is great, and we've got a question in already from our space enthusiastic audience. Leah's asking, as an astronomer, what's your opinion on the Starlink satellites?
That's yes. I have so many opinions about Starlink satellites because I'm first of all going to say I absolutely love the concept of having these mega constellations, having internet connectivity around the world. I love satellite technology. I love reusable rocket launchers. I think they are quite literally one of the coolest things ever, the fact you can send up a rocket and bring it back again. So from my kind of proper space enthusiast side, I love it. I think it's great. From my astronomer side, I'm sat there going, "Oh, Lord, please stop polluting the night sky. Please listen to astronomers, because there's got to be some sort of levels of collaboration where we've got to be able to share the night sky in a sustainable and productive sort of way." So I think it's tricky. I think everyone will struggle with kind of their love of astronomy and space and looking at beautiful astronomical images, but also rocket launches are just really cool. So I think it's a really hard thing to balance.
Yeah.
But what is quite promising is that satellite companies, at least OneWeb and SpaceX, and people like AST Mobile do appear to be working with astronomers to kind of fix some of the problems. So it's not all falling on deaf ears. It's not just it's not this kind of one-way street. Actually, there is a lot of collaboration in the sector, which is great, because if there can be a back and forwards, it means we can share the night sky sustainably, I think.
Great, yeah. Thanks for your question, Leah. If any of you have any more questions, just let us know in the chat below, and hopefully we can ask those to Heidi before the end of our talk. Let's talk a little bit more about your involvement with kind of space education. I know you spent some time at space school. I think during your time, during your PhD, you were a night duty astronomer.
Yeah, I've been probably in that field for just as long as I've been in astronomy, really, maybe a bit longer. So space school, I went to space school. It's a summer camp. It's a little bit like Space Camp America, I guess, in the UK. And I went to that when I was a kid. I went to the University of Leicester and had kind of great fun summer messing about doing astronaut training. And when I got a bit older, I thought, you know what, I'd love to go back, but as a teacher. So I've been back for many summers now teaching. You take kids indoor skydiving and astronaut training, doing lots of lectures and talks, playing with robots and kind of launching and building rockets. That's really just so much fun. I think you can get a huge amount out of actually getting involved in space activities. I think if you get a chance to get hands-on with some really cool space things, then you're really going to develop a love of space. And I think that's what Space School does really well. You've got these activities that students can do. They can get hands-on. They can actually put the astronaut costume. I've seen people wearing them, and I just think that looks so cool. And that sort of stuff will really instill kind of a love of space in young people. And then a bit further up, I've been involved in lots of teaching for astronomy. So with the Pirate telescope that you can use at the Open University, a lot of our students will choose a module where they can spend time looking through the telescope, setting it up, kind of setting remote observations up, or taking beautiful astrophotography. So I've been kind of regularly teaching on that. But as I said earlier, pretty much anyone can go search for Pirate telescope online, and you can get a certain amount of time you can use for free. Which is fantastic. If you don't have a telescope at home, you can go and use one of a kind of research class telescope for pretty much anything you want. Just don't point it at the moon. It's a bit bright.
Wow, that's crazy. And then we spoke a little bit about kind of inspiring young people in space and STEM, and then that kind of led perfectly into your involvement with spacecareers.uk. What was that? How did that go?
Yeah, Space Careers was a really fun project that I did for many years, and it's a really successful project that many others are continuing now. And essentially, when I was a student, when a lot of my friends were students, we were trying to look for jobs in space, in astronomy, and there wasn't really any sort of centralized hub out there. It was just before Tim Peak had been launched, actually, so kind of you know as well as me that SpaceX has suddenly gone kind of straight off its launch really over the last few years. But about 5, 6, 7 years ago, there wasn't a huge amount of information out there about how to get into the space sector. So some of my friends decided to build this platform where all of this information, all these jobs were centralized. I came along and then helped out, and then we've basically grown that website into something that's really successful. And well, I think it's been quite helpful in providing people with some advice for how to get into space and how to follow their dreams, really. It's been rewarding. It's been good fun. I've met so many cool people from it.
Yeah, I can say firsthand that spacecareers.uk has been useful, because when I was searching for a role in the space industry a few years back, that was definitely one of kind of the websites I was looking at to search for opportunities in the space industry. And then when I was kind of looking through your LinkedIn profile earlier today, I was like, oh wow, you actually contributed so much to this amazing website.
I'm glad it was useful, because it's something that I think people stumble across and go, oh wow, there's actually this kind of website about space stuff out there. So I think it's nice that it's all centralized. I'm not running it anymore, but the team that are doing it now are doing a fantastic job.
Yeah, no, it's a great thing that I think you've been involved in. We've got a question from Helen. Thanks, Helen, for tuning in. She's saying, "Hi Heidi, lovely talk. What do you think about sky viewing apps?" She thinks they're great for getting children into stargazing.
Yeah, I absolutely love them. Honestly, one of the reasons I got into stargazing, apart from the eclipse, which I saw when I was really kind of probably too young to fully appreciate it, was
Yeah.
later on actually being able to use stargazing or kind of sky viewing apps. So there used to be one on kind of Apple Mac called Starry Starry Night, and it's a little bit like Stellarium, but the Apple version. And you could zoom through space and look at planets and stars, and that was so cool. I spent hours on that as a kid. But when I actually wanted to get into stargazing a bit more, I used, or not stargazing, but kind of looking at the night sky in general.
Yeah.
I used something called Heavens Above. I don't know if you've heard of it.
I personally haven't, no.
It's this app which is really quite useful because it not only you orientate it so you kind of it matches the sky above you.
Yeah.
It shows you where the stars are and where the constellations are, but also shows you where satellite passes are going over. So it's a lot busier now that Starlink is going over.
Yeah.
But when I was looking, you could watch iridium flares going over, and they would kind of flare in the night sky, and you could see exactly when you'd see them. So you could find the constellation, look up, and see this flash in the night sky, or track the International Space Station. So if anyone wants to get into stargazing and also satellite kind of viewing, Heavens Above is absolutely an amazing app to use.
Great, check it out. There's also, I think, Skyview alongside Heavens Above is pretty good.
Stellarium's great too.
Yeah, I think it's great for people who kind of are thinking about getting a telescope and aren't quite sure.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, it's quite a big investment if you do want to get a telescope. So it's quite nice to have a star viewing app, maybe get some binoculars, or even just kind of naked eye view and kind of look at the night sky and try and work out what's there, maybe before you choose to kind of drop a couple of £100 on a telescope.
Definitely, yeah. Let's talk a little bit more about your academic career. Now, you've got a PhD in variable stars, which makes sense because we've been talking about stars for the past 40 minutes. But did you always know that you wanted to do a PhD and specifically with something to do with stars?
No, absolutely not. When I was applying to university, I genuinely was leaning more towards kind of aerospace engineering. So I had both an application for physics and aerospace engineering to send off. Can't remember why I went down the physics route, but I did. When I was coming to the end of a physics degree, I was again kind of a bit of a crossroads. Do I want to go into engineering? So I was kind of looking at nuclear engineering, something kind of quite heavy engineering, space, or kind of rocket engineering, all that sort of stuff. It was a few years back now. Or I could do a PhD in astronomy. And I knew that I'd really enjoyed messing about with telescopes, working with telescopes, looking for exoplanets as part of my degree. So I thought I will go down that route and see where it takes me. Because it was something I enjoyed. So I thought, you know what, I'll just spend a few years more doing something I really enjoy and then see what happens afterwards. So I didn't know where it was going to go, but I just thought I'll do what I enjoy, and it seemed to have worked out.
It does, yeah, great. But you haven't completely forgotten your aerospace links because you've been doing some great stuff with women in aerospace.
Yeah, there's a great network of kind of pretty self-explanatory women in aerospace across Europe. So there's loads of different hubs. There's kind of a UK hub because like the UK isn't that big compared to most of Europe, but then most countries in Europe have a different hub where women in aerospace get together, run lots of events. It's open to any genders as well, but it's called Women in Aerospace. But anyone is really welcome to join. And they do lots of events, lots of training. They do some absolutely mean bacon sandwiches at conferences. If you're ever invited to a business breakfast, absolutely go for it. So those sorts of things are kind of, it's good to have a supportive network of people that you can call on for kind of camaraderie or for advice or kind of for sharing events. So it's really nice to have that involvement.
Definitely. It's great to hear that you've been so involved with the space industry all the way from kind of young people, students, schools, all the way to kind of people who are searching for jobs in the industry. And for the kind of the last 5-10 minutes of our talk, I wanted to speak about specifically kind of involving young people in space in terms of like STEM abilities, because that's something I think you focused on at Space School is how do you involve young people in STEM and science? What do you think is what message do you have to maybe a teacher or a parent that's looking to inspire their students or kids in STEM?
That's a really, it's a hard question, but it's a good one because there's so many things you can say, but you're not, obviously there's kind of, there's so many things you could say, but I'm not sure which is the correct one. I think
Okay. What's your view on it? Like, what would you do?
I would say one thing is actually how parents and teachers and even kind of YouTubers and people on kind of social media talk about maths and physics. Because I think a lot of people really shy away, or they think it's scary, or they say, oh, I don't need maths. But actually, it's really useful. It is interesting. And I think if you put a kid off maths when they're quite young, they're always going to have this kind of preconception that maths is hard, it's not for them, or they'll never need it. But if it's brought into kind of daily life in a more normal sort of way, a bit like English, you go and read a book, it's not scary. You just pick up a book, you pick up the TV guide. Not that they really exist now, but but if maths is just a bit more normalized as something that people just do, I think that would help STEM careers quite a lot. So it's kind of parents' kind of conceptions of what maths and what physics is. And also, I think it's important to show that you can do maths and physics and space and aerospace engineering, but you can be quite normal as well. So there's a lot of kind of the stereotypes that you're kind of some mad scientist, but actually everyone working in the sector is pretty normal, really. They're all nice people. So it is like having opportunities to go and speak to scientists or engineers, having fun days, kind of going to the space store and kind of going to kind of see people who actually just work in the sector being normal and having a normal life. So I don't know, there's so many things you could say, but hopefully those are, I think they're things which are important anyway.
Definitely. And what kind of resources would you point parents or teachers towards if they especially want to get involved in STEM?
I think genuinely there's lots of really good space YouTubers out there, or kind of STEM YouTubers. One which like a lot of people don't really think about as sciencey is the slow-mo guys. So they kind of explore a lot of kind of quite complex physics and maths problems through slow motion, but you don't really realize you're watching a science video. It's just a really cool video. And then there's this kind of Tom Stott that does that on YouTube, so he does some great things as well. But also kind of looking up loads of free resources from the European Space Agency, from kind of STEM learning, from Ezero UK. They've got some really fab kind of free downloads that you can just kind of use. So I think there's a lot out there. It's not, if you don't know where to go, I would just suggest typing kind of space activities into YouTube. You'll probably find it. There's loads of things out there.
It's all available on the internet, to be honest. Like, you just need to go out there and look for it. Like you said, ESA, NASA, there's so many resources that they produce for space outreach. One final question on that is, do you think as the UK space industry and of course the global space industry is growing, do you think that we're moving away from that stereotype of you need to be all sciencey to go into the space industry, or do you think that stereotype is kind of fading away now a little bit?
I think it is fading away, because I think people are realizing that space isn't just about rocket scientists. It's not just about astronomers. There's pretty much every job in a space business. There's accountants, there's receptionists, there's people who do finance or business development. There's the people who will kind of do graphic design and amazing videos. There's quite literally streamers. There's also the scientists and the computer scientists. But I think it feels more like there's more ways to be involved in space rather than just doing a physics degree. So I'm hoping that because of that, people can see themselves working at a space company, even if they haven't got a really stereotypical space background. Because there's loads of great opportunities, and you get involved in space stuff anyway if you're at one of those companies. You can't avoid it, really.
Yeah, no, you can't. And then I wanted to ask kind of what your role is on a day-to-day basis as a space technology project manager. What kind of stuff do you do?
Anything really at the moment. So we're pretty much at the start of setting up this project to provide apprenticeships and training for businesses in Cornwall and the Southwest, to get people kind of upskilled, get them kind of working in space. So it could be anything from one day from organizing kind of a welding session. So I'm not a welder. It's completely above me. But there's this fantastic welding suite where they do coded welding with kind of really fancy metals. So it might be organizing that one day, but it might be going to a conference the other day, or it might be going to a school to talk about space and physics, or it might be kind of setting up events and business meetings. So there's kind of every different thing in my role, but the key bit holding it together is that I get to talk to really cool people who all really are passionate about space, and you kind of, it's really infectious. You kind of get that energy that everyone loves space, everyone wants to kind of do the best, and everyone wants to kind of try and improve opportunities for others.
Definitely, no. Enthusiasm for space is definitely infectious, and I hope we're doing a good job here at Space Store of trying to carry on that vibe of space throughout our YouTube channel. So once again, thank you to everyone who's tuned in tonight. Thanks again if you're watching it on catch up. Remember, it's going to be on our YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe, like, and share it to anyone who you think is interested in space. Heidi, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. I've learned so much about stars. It's been great.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I've really enjoyed kind of meeting you kind of virtually and properly having a chance to chat. So it's been really nice to be here. So thanks.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for joining in to the Space Store Live. This was the first talk of season 4. But remember, next Thursday, you need to tune in to Astro Agency's Spacebar. Now, recently, Space Store have launched a new partnership with Spacebar, run by the Astro Agency. So go check that out on their Facebook, their LinkedIn, and their Twitter. They do amazing talks with Dallas Campbell and Susie Imber. And on next week's talk, they're actually going to have Bianca Cefalo, Leah Nani Alcancel, and Tim Chrisman on their 38th Spacebar. So go check that out with the link, which should be popping up in the description sometime soon. And also go check out on spacetour.co/events, where you can also check out the upcoming space bars and register for them. Once again, Heidi, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I certainly did. And we'll see you again on Space Tour Live very soon. Have a great evening, everyone.